AI, robotics, the list goes on and on. You heard what the people just said there. What are your big takeaways from this year's big CES?
Well, one of the fascinating things actually was the fact that there was so much focus and attention on enterprise technology. So on the first day, the major chip companies all did keynotes. So NVIDIA and Intel and AMD. And, I've been going to CES for decades,
Right.
and we never would hear about details around chips. And yet, not only did we hear that, but we also heard them talking about AI racks for the enterprise, huge servers that cost millions of dollars, not exactly a consumer product.
Right, right.
But it's just fascinating to see how much of an influence all that is having because of the way we're thinking about AI. So the bottom line theme is AI was everywhere in many different forms, physical AI for robotics, other AI added to lots of other types of products.
I want to dig deeper into AI in just a bit. And while you've been there for years, I've been on this end watching it for years, and it seems like the people who go there are so well versed and so intelligent about what's been going on. To me, that's fascinating. And so how does the tech that's really showcased at CES shape the industry roadmap for 2026 and beyond?
Well, that's exact. I mean, CES being at the start of the year, it's that opportunity for companies kind of make a statement, do big announcements around stuff that's, directly, obviously, the actual products, new TVs and fridges and robots and all that cool stuff, but also that underlying technology. So that's why these chip companies have become so prominent over the last couple of years, and were particularly so at the beginning of this year's show. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you can walk away with a good sense of where we're going to go in the tech industry by attending CES, which is why, people in the know, try and get there and see what's going on. And indeed, we saw a lot of stuff. What's fascinating to me is, of course, there was a lot on humanoid robots and a lot on AI smart glasses and some things like that. But I think the most relevant differences that are going to be AI driven and that we saw at this year's show were ways to make our existing devices, whether it's a TV, a PC, a smartphone, a car, that much better and easier to use. And so a lot of the most important innovations, I think, are going to be things along those lines. And that really came out to me at this particular show.
Bob, let's talk more about that, because to me, how much of what was unveiled there is futuristic, some kind of concept that's down the road, and how much is real product marketing that's going to be heading out very soon, for example, in healthcare, the service industry, and so on?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sean. And, frankly, most of the robotics were just basically prototypes or concepts. Those we're not going to see for a long time. And this idea that we're going to have a humanoid robot in our house doing laundry, yeah, we'll see in the 2030s, perhaps. But a lot of the other things we are really going to start to see. And again, that gets down to some of the things I was saying. So we saw a lot more developments, for example, around AI PCs, which have actually been out for a while, and I think are finally starting to get more relevant. We've got TVs with voice-based interfaces. Amazon showed this Fire TV where you can just really easily interact with it. We've got more capabilities with smartphones. Ambient intelligence. Lenovo announced a really intriguing kind of new concept they call Kira, QIRA, and it's designed to allow all their various devices, they own the Motorola smartphones, all the Lenovo PCs, all these things to interact with one another and use AI and personalize that AI experience with your own information. So those are the kinds of things that I think are going to be important. This notion of multi-connected, easier to use, easier to configure types of developments, and then even extending that into the car as well. And we'll see a lot more around that.
We talked a lot about the positive. So how much discussion was there about tariffs, inflation, supply chain pressure influencing companies at CES?
What was fascinating was there was almost no discussion on the tariffs this year.
Wow.
But what there was a big discussion on was around supply chain issues with regards to DRAM or memory chips. Every single one of these digital devices that has any kind of computing in it, be a robot, a car, TV, phone, PC, they all use what's called DRAM, dynamic random access memory. That's the working area that all the computing is enabled with. And what we just saw toward the end of 2025 was a huge spike in demand for DRAM. Part of this comes from those AI servers I mentioned earlier, but the net of it is all these devices are going to get more expensive because they all need memory, they all want more memory, and yet it's going to cost more and it's going to be harder to get. So that's going to be the big challenge in 2026, is this DRAM shortage.
And Bob, also in 2025, a lot of Chinese companies had difficulty getting into CES, visa issues. Wasn't the case this year. What changed, and how important is it to have China there for a global scale to talk about what's happening globally?
Well, I mean, it's obviously it's important to have Chinese companies that are a critical player there. And yeah, I mean, there were plenty of China. It was kind of like the old days. It was like nothing had ever happened before. You know, so there were a ton of Chinese companies there, and obviously in certain areas, the Chinese move fast and furious. You know, they like to break things as it were. That is, try and push things harder. You know, sometimes not always. In the case of the robotics, there's real concerns about how safe some of those devices are going to be. There's got to be more regulations there going on. But look, it's important to see where companies can take this. And a lot of Chinese companies are very hungry and eager to make advances, like I said, in robotics in particular. Also in autonomous cars, we've seen EVs have been Chinese players have been very important in EVs as well. And so there was a bunch of that on display at CES as well. So it's important for the whole world to kind of see what some of these Chinese companies are doing, and then make some comparisons to some of the companies from other places around the world.